Welcome to this edition of In-Depth Alaska. As with so many cities, homelessness is a major issue in Anchorage. On Thursday, reporter Lauren Maxwell sat down with Farina Brown, the new homeless coordinator for the municipality of Anchorage. Here is an extended version of that interview.
So over that time period, I'm sure you've seen changes in Anchorage.
Yes.
And people are frustrated.
Yes.
People are frustrated at what they see on the streets, and they are frustrated at being, front row to people's struggles. What are your thoughts on that? Do you understand those feelings?
I do.
Yeah, tell us a little about that.
Again, and I've said this, the complexity of homelessness is a cascade effect. It is the individual as well as their family and their community. Because when you are unsheltered, your experience is now public. And as an individual, as a business, as a homeowner, there's a level of understanding, but there's also a desire that something should be done to ensure that there are resources to support individuals. And that's where I see my role is really helping to coordinate and integrate. How do we co-create solutions? How do I identify the lessons that were learned from what we've done over the years that have worked? How do we then look at what those challenges and those barriers are? Because it's not just about addressing the community concern, but it's also ensuring that we have real solutions for those individuals that are experiencing homelessness, that are going to that will move them out of the system. And there's not going to be this repeat cycle from shelter back onto the street. So I can respect where that level of frustration is, but I would also just really like to say that there's not a singular solution to how we do this. And so I see my role as coming in and coordinating interdepartmentally with all of the folks within the municipality that are still here that have been standing in a very difficult space in how do we address this. And then all of the community partners that are always stepping up. In my first week, I was pleasantly surprised with the number of people that reached out from the community that said, how can we support? And it wasn't an overwhelming flood of, here's the problem and what are you going to do about it? As well as being able to take that deep breath after meeting with all of the departments and understanding that they were willing to be a part of the solution to help me understand what's already been done. And particularly the folks at the Anchorage Health Department and Parks and Rec and APD who said, how do we come together, and really talked about in such an energetic and positive way that what we're doing and what we can do is totally open, that there are solutions.
Well, I think that's the question people will ask is there a plan going forward?
Absolutely. So for the administration and personally for myself, the first priority is ensuring that we have a winter shelter plan available ahead of winter. The Anchorage Health Department Homeless Services Division, they've already moved the request for proposals for a congregate and non-congregate shelter. Those proposals close August 30th, which means we'll be able to approve contracts in September and have dates for our shelter by October. That creates a level of continuity and consistency for our referring providers and for individuals that rely on these services. So I'm just pleased that there was a foundation that I get to build from. And the second and most important is creating a plan for the year-round shelter and a long-term housing plan, which is going to be dynamic and require many partners. I'm grateful that I get a better starting place than many people that have stood in this role do, because we have the money from the state to operate the year-round shelter. So that gives me time to work with community partners, interdepartmentally, cross-sector, to really talk about what are shelter options. We have a year-round shelter, but how do we create a continuum? How do we ensure that we've considered safe parking, smaller sites, being thoughtful around a large congregate shelter has proven that that is not the way to go, and that we need more options. And we need options that are going to create flow in the system where people are not just staying trapped in homelessness and utilizing shelter services back onto the street, back into the shelter.
So just for clarity, you you have proposals out. We have the year-round shelter right now.
Correct.
In Midtown. The proposals are out for winter sheltering. Will that look different than it did last winter? Are we talking about hotel rooms or?
So the proposals are for non-congregate sites, which would be hotel rooms, but we're also looking at what those proposals are. So it may not be the same locations, but it will be a number of scattered site in addition to the congregate shelter.
And is the year-round shelter that we have some funding for now, is that sufficient? Are you talking about opening a larger or different or scattered site shelters around?
We will absolutely need the scattered site. The singular shelter is not going to be sufficient. Right now, we estimate that we'll probably need 500 beds for the number of unsheltered coming up this winter, which is drastically different than the 900 we saw last year. So I'm happy to see that there's been movement in the system, but thinking about 500 individuals still need a place to go tells us that we have a lot of work ahead of us.
So there's 500 people that are you're predicting that will be unhoused this winter. Is that what you're saying? And the shelter, we don't know how much shelter space we have right now, or
in the congregate shelter, there's capacity for 200.
For 200.
And we know, and that gives us our baseline estimates for the number of non-congregate shelter beds we'll need.
So I think the really pressing thing that people are so frustrated about is right now we are abating camps, and it's, they pop up a block further down the road. Is that going to be the policy going forward? Are we still going to abate camps when there is no room at the shelter? What are we doing with that?
I appreciate the question. Abatement is absolutely a tool that we will continue to use, but we fully recognize that abatement is not a solution. Abatement occurs when there's a public safety concern, when camps reach a certain size, or even when a camp is dangerous. When a camp is near playgrounds, we have to take action to ensure that there's public safety, and that is a response that includes APD. What we try to do is to ensure that there's outreach that occurs before that camp is abated so that individuals are linked to resources, that they're aware of where there's shelter capacity. Sometimes it's just connecting with someone that can connect them back to family, and they don't necessarily need to go into the shelter. I also want to acknowledge that there are two groups of campers. There are also those that have no desire to go into a shelter. They aren't interested in resources, and they're often the source of criminal activity. In those situations, that's a public safety response. That's where we rely on APD to address that issue, because my role is ensuring that there's linkage for individuals, that we are responding when a camp needs to be abated. But once there's criminal activity, that becomes a public safety concern, and that becomes a partnership with APD.
So what does that mean, that those people should be arrested? Is that something we're going to do going forward?
We are not criminalizing being unsheltered. Sleeping on the street is not criminal. However, if someone is engaging in criminal behavior, that's very different. And the expectation that I have, and as anyone in the community, is that if you're breaking the law, if you're breaking into my business, if you are victimizing someone, I expect that the police will respond to that just in the same way that I would if I called the police for my home because someone is breaking in. So I feel like there's not a separate measuring stick because you're homeless, then the laws don't apply to you. But that is for those very specific individuals that are breaking the law, that are creating that criminal element. And that is not indicative of all individuals that are experiencing homelessness. Often the folks that are within those camps are victims themselves. And so that's why that element of having street outreach is so critically important, because those folks that actually need that level of support, they can have someone in a trusted space to say, I need help, they're there.
And also, a lot of, we work right across the street from Fairbanks Street. So that, of course, was people that started at Cuddy, they moved to Fairbanks. Now some of them have taken route a little bit further into Midtown, but these are people in vehicles. Do we need to have sanctioned camping for people either in vehicles or some other, type of sanctioned camping?
I totally believe in having a continuum of services, which would include safe parking, and really thinking about, in this continuum of services, as we talked about, congregate shelter, non-congregate shelter, from shelter services through tiny homes and other solutions that have been brought forward, not just in this conversation, but by Muni employees, as I've had this first week to really engage with people from the community and in the meetings during the transition, just talking about having support and choice. And a part of support and choice would include safe parking. So it is absolutely something that we are exploring.
Okay. What else are we exploring that people would want to know about? Right
now, I am focused on ensuring that we have our congregate and non-congregate shelters up and operational ahead of winter, and working on the year-round shelter plan while simultaneously working with departments and community members to explore these other options. So this comes into kind of that brevity in my role where what are those immediate priorities, and that's first, let's get those the shelter services ahead of winter set, while we also kind of onboard these other ideas. So on day 9, putting it together.
Okay. What do you want to say to just the community in general? And I hate to keep having the perspective of the community versus people that are experiencing homelessness, but it really does feel like people are just terribly frustrated. And they look around and say, this isn't the Anchorage that I remember from 10 years ago, or even maybe 5 years ago.
Absolutely. Community frustration is well received and well understood. When we look at someone who is unsheltered, it is very difficult to say, why are we not putting forward a solution, because it impacts my humanity. And it's much easier for me to say, what are you doing? Why are we not doing something? What is very hard to put forward is that the number of individuals that are experiencing homelessness is greatly reduced, but what I see on the street and what I experience is very different than me saying, here's what the data shows. And that's why having shelter solutions, having the catalyzed energy of the Anchorage Health Department, APD, and Parks and Recs, and an administration that really views our role as being able to create solutions that are not just a reflection of this is what our administration did, but how do we ensure that we're embedding standard operating procedures that exist so that there's continuity to how we address homelessness, that there are shelter solutions regardless of who's sitting in the chairs. Because most importantly for us, it's about serving. And the way we serve is to move people out of homelessness, which then reduces the visibility of what our community sees. It reduces the impact on their businesses, and it helps them to understand that we are a community, and they get to see that again, and they get to feel that. I want to acknowledge, like I said earlier, so many community members reached out to me in that first week that while there is a level of frustration, there's also so much energy around how can people be a part of a solution? And that's the Anchorage that I've come to know since moving here in 2010.
What about treatment for mental health and substance abuse? Does that need to be part of the equation? Are we doing anything with that?
Absolutely. Engaging with community behavioral health providers, treatment services providers is absolutely essential. It is not a secret. A huge component of what we're seeing in camps is substance use. So a part of outreach is linking individuals. When we talk about linking them to resources, that includes an understanding of treatment services and what's available. One thing that is and will be different is lessons learned from last winter is ensuring that there's a housing focus within our congregate and non-congregate shelters that focuses on linkage to community resources, which includes treatment. There's been a lot of conversation with our community behavioral health providers to be in this space and to recognize that we can move someone into shelter, but if I'm experiencing withdrawal, I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to be able to engage with you in a conversation about what's next, because all I'm thinking about is how I'm feeling in this very moment. So having those partners at the table willing to take immediate referrals and help people get into a better place in their life where once permanent supportive housing becomes available, that they can maintain that is absolutely a part of our conversation. And I am incredibly grateful to the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, who's been pulling these conversations together, to individual behavioral health providers that have reached out to say they're happy to stand and be in this space and walk alongside us to provide the services.
Do we have the funding to accomplish all these things?
Well, here's the good thing. Often the behavioral health providers will help those individuals once they come into treatment to get connected to Medicaid services. They'll look at other funding routes. Often those programs are grant funded, so there's not the immediate need for there to be funding to follow the person. There's absolute receptivity to bringing that person in unfunded and letting them get started in treatment services. Community behavioral health providers aren't going to say after week 2, sorry, your Medicaid's not active, you have to go. So I feel very confident in saying and knowing that our partners are there regardless of fund source.
And when you cited specifically, this is a lesson learned from last winter, do you just mean that we need to have a better presence at some of these shelters in terms of, representing different agencies and whatnot?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have the absolute beautiful and wonderful capacity to refer people to the 3rd Avenue Navigation Center when they are outside of shelter, to say here's a great location where there are multiple partners and providers that you can engage with for employment services, treatment services, medical. But within the shelter, we also recognize that we need to have some level of case management to link people, because during the day, sometimes it's hard to get away from my known group. But in the shelter, if I can have that one-on-one connection with someone to say, can you help me find access to? And we know that making that available really creates change.
Okay. Do you have any sense of how much time it may take before people see a noticeable difference of fewer people on the streets?
I do not. I know I could shake my magic 8-ball, but I feel like it'll say ask again later.
Okay. Anything else that you want people to know?
I think what I would want people to know is what I had the experience of walking into, is that there is a real sense and desire that we can do better, and that is coming from within the municipality and from the community. So while right now we are at that hump on the complexity of this, the visibility, the anxiety, and the frustration, that there's also this ongoing energy and active work to create actionable, sustainable solutions, and that is not just something that we're coming in as a campaign conversation, that this is real work that's being done. Partners are being invited to the table, and again, I am fortunate that I get to stand on a foundation that's already here with the Anchorage Health Department, with Parks and Rec, on how we move forward. So I get the opportunity to say, lessons learned, so then how do we make this better? How do we improve it? And how do we continually respond to the changing and dynamic needs?
We'd like to thank Farina Brown for sitting down with us. Thank you for listening to In Depth Alaska. Please like and subscribe to this podcast.